Hello again, this is another part of my Burning Heaven setting, and I will continue with the races. The next race is the Saku. They are obsessed with collecting things, and in particular, each Saku has one thing that they prize above all other things of wealth. The special obsession could be a very mundane and ordinary thing, but to the Saku that is obsessed with it, it could be worth many times its weight in gold. The downside of this race, sort of their weakness as it were, is that they do not have the ability to feel joy or happiness. Really, when I was thinking about the creation of this race, I was thinking of Eeyore from the Winnie the Pooh series. So they're very sad, very emo if you want to call them that. They do not feel joy. They do not understand a lot of the other races because of things like humor and laughter. It's just not a part of their makeup. They just weren't made that way. Their appearance, Ursaku are very tall and have very strong limbs. They have a dark red skin that is very rough and jagged with bone-like protrusions all over them. They have long, greasy black hair that grows very quickly, including their eyelashes. Mustaches, beards, ear hair, nostril hair, and eyebrows, which they all must trim and pretty much maintain every day. Some of them might have different color hair, like red or dark brown, but you get the idea that they basically they have lots of upkeep with their hair. They have large, sad-looking brown and white eyes that constantly change. Sometimes the white is the majority of the eye, sometimes the brown is. Their faces are broad and honest looking, albeit scary to some, and there's always kind of a sad expression on their faces. They have 4 thin curving horns that start at their foreheads and sweep back to where their large flapping ears rest on the side of their heads. They have enormous hunchbacks, and their arms kind of reach down towards the ground, and sometimes they drag. On their arms, they have these long dragging tendrils that kind of lay on the ground, and they drag them from, as they walk. Each arm has 4 of these. They're sort of like ropes, rope-like tendrils, and they actually taste the ground as they walk. Sometimes while walking, one of them will stop and admire the taste of the ground that they are on, especially if the mineral deposits have a strange mixture that they are not used to. They are known to take many walks because of the pleasant tastes that they get while doing so. And I don't have it listed on the setting, but we always kind of thought that maybe there's like some sort of enzyme or acidic nature to these tendrils that really couldn't be used for combat, but really to sort of digest a little bit of the minerals as they walk so that they actually taste them. Ursaku bodies are normally very heavy, and they have many folds of flesh that seem to pile up one upon each other. Like on their backs, you'll see in the illustration. I tried to, just show you that their skin kind of folds over each other. Normally they leave very deep footprints and drag marks from their arm tendrils wherever they go. They are used to being looked at by those that find them strange looking, but they don't really hold that against them. They also think that they're kind of strange looking compared to everything else. They're a long-lived race. They live about 500 years. Some of their special abilities would be like accelerated healing. They just have an enormous size, and they're really strong. And they're usually good in the outdoors. The Ursaku culture is strange compared to some of the other cultures in that they celebrate absolutely nothing. They do not have holy days. They don't celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, none of it. They don't celebrate anything. The idea of a party doesn't really even make sense to them. For them, life is just one long grinding day after the last one, and will continue to be that way until they finally die. And we talked about how they do not feel joy, and that's really kind of affected the culture in strange ways. If you wanted to sum up the culture in 2 words, it would be sorrow and obsession. Like I said, each one has an obsession for some sort of object that reaches almost religious fanaticism. And a lot of them will actually incorporate their obsession into their religious thoughts and philosophies. They can be kind of a loner race, but they are smart enough to realize that what they want and what must be done to survive are not usually the same thing. So they will gather together to help each other, to form small communities. They are reluctant members of groups, so mixed racial groups they would have to have some sort of reason for being there, such as being a powerful bodyguard or perhaps shock troops for an army. It would have to be worth their while, in other words. So for them, life is just one long grinding, existence where they suffer pain and but they do it with honor, and almost nothing surprises them, or at least they pretend that nothing surprises them. They prefer to live in places that other races avoid, tops of mountains, deep deserts, and really they just want to be alone. They want to be isolated, and whenever other races do bump into them, they are cordial with them, but they usually try to get them to move on so that they can get back to their lives. They'll dress in bland browns and gray colors, long, not really flowing robes, but enough to cover their bodies. They have a very fatalistic viewpoint, and many of them look forward to the day of their death. In fact, there have been others that have kind of come up that like to prophesy when an H.A.R.P is going to die. And sometimes these prophecies are, just hoaxes, but there do seem to be a legitimate amount of them that are actually true. The next race is the Uzud-Irig-Jestchen. And yeah, it is a mouthful. It definitely means mushroom vine is what what those two words mean. They do not talk at all, since they don't have vocal cords or even mouths. They communicate with a form of sign language that mixes dance with limb gestures. They are lovers of art and dance, and much of their free time is spent in those pursuits. They take a neutral approach to life and are willing to forgive much. They photosynthesize most of their food and need to spend time in the light to feed, although they can absorb decaying matter through the fungi strands for nourishment. Both the vines and the fungi share what nourishment they receive, so as long as sunlight or decaying matter is available, they can survive. And for their appearance, they are actually two living things. They are moving fungi strands and like a long vine plant that have formed a symbiotic relationship. They are made from 8 long fungi muscular strands that can move fairly quickly, and the plant vines sort of hold them together and orchestrate their movements. The long vine plant is the brains of the collaborative creature. They have many joints, sort of in quotes, if you can call them that, because these joints are essentially where the vines have tied the long fungus strands together. None of them look exactly the same, because depending on where the joints are, they can be radically different. So it's kind of like, make your own structure, make your own form, depending on what you think would be worthwhile. So you could have 4-legged characters, or 2-legged, 3-legged. It might have 2 heads, in quotes, where just really where a bunch of the vines are all kind of tangled up together and tied off. You can really have a lot of fun with that, I think, as a player, if you wanted to. They have joints in strange places, and they can move these locations, these joints, by essentially just moving the vines. So even if you do come up with an interesting form, you can change it depending on what you would need to do to achieve some mission, or basically to survive. Many of the other races find them to be disturbing because they are so unlike anything else on the planet. They're really strange. And to communicate with them, you would have to learn the sign language that they have. For the special abilities, they are artistic. They're pretty tough. They don't really have any sort of organs that can be damaged. They don't really give off an odor, and they don't really need to sleep. Okay, I'll talk about their culture a little bit. The Uzud-Irig-Jestchen spend much of their lives near rivers, and they like to be just basically close to water if possible, or at least in areas that have lots of rainfall because they need water as well. They mostly build their cultures along rivers and riverbanks, sometimes lakes. They'll have houses that are on stilts, or even houseboats. A lot of them do live on boats on the rivers themselves. Let's see here. So really they're river folk for the most part. They are ample swimmers, and they do pretty well with that. They don't fish for themselves, but some of them have learned this trait so that they can basically use a natural resource that they don't use and send it off to other races as a form of trade. They do not like to wear clothing because that would keep them from being able to photosynthesize, but they do decorate themselves, and they kind of alter their natural coloring at times. They find the idea of painting themselves or getting tattoos to be distasteful. They think that their own forms are beautiful as they are. They are very patient people, and they like simple things, such as watching the river flow by them, relaxing, and just soaking up the sun. And they seem to depend more on nature and more on the sunlight than other races, because they're just a plant race. So really, if you think about a plant race that can move, you pretty much get the idea. The last main race of the Burning Heavens setting is the H.A.R.P. They are known to be sarcastic, gruff, rude, and they like to tell lots of dirty jokes. They can be quite humorous to those that appreciate potty humor. They are impeccable warriors and spend much of their time practicing warfare or games that emulate war, or basically just strengthen them. They also have lots of competitions where two of them face off and hurl insults at each other, or duels, dueling of insults, and these can often turn into brawls. They are very strong foes and very good friends. They look like a thin, round, edged pentagon with 5 arms coming out of the sides that end in hands. They have sort of like a turtle-like shell on their backs, and their mouth, ears, and nose are underneath. They have 5 eyes on their sides, so like 1 eye on every side of the pentagon. So they basically can see in all directions. They normally use 1, 2, or 3 hands to perform duties, while the other arms and hands act like legs. They normally wear thick gloves to protect all of their hands. It is reported that there are 6 different sexes to this race, and only they really know how it all works out to produce offspring. But it is guessed that it is a complicated and strange process. And knowing their liking of dirty humor, they're pretty kinky as well. Some of their abilities are very athletic, they're very quick, pretty nimble. They have really good reflexes, and they're able to regenerate fairly well when they get wounded. I'll talk about their culture a little bit. The H.A.R.P. spend a lot of time playing difficult physical sports as children and into adulthood. They have large volunteer militias that practice the art of warfare on a daily basis. Their aim is more at protecting their homes than the conquest of other races, however. They have a tendency to be rude and crass when telling jokes and when interacting with other races. And they're even more so when they realize that the race is, or the character, the person, is uncomfortable with the way they are. So instead of toning their humor down, they tend to increase it, and they're even more racy than they normally would be. Preferred locations: they prefer to live in swamp areas, as they feel that they are the best places to defend themselves against outside attacks. Because no one really wants to storm a swampy, swampland to try to take over something. Their clothing and decoration: they like to wrap their arms in colored fabrics and dyed ropes. They tend to paint their shells with colors that help them blend into the swamp or whatever environment they're currently in. And sometimes they tend to have other H.A.R.P. help them because they can't reach the top of their backs. They occasionally tattoo their arms as well when they achieve a victory in sports or on the battlefield. Their demeanor: they can be rough. Like I said, they tell lots of jokes. They have a good sense of humor. They're very strong allies and very powerful foes. It is good to keep them on your side. If facing one in combat, sometimes they will yield to an opponent that has a thoroughly This basically thoroughly impressed them with their show of combat. So sometimes when they are hired on as soldiers, the people that hire them are kind of frustrated with them because they will switch sides if they really respect the prowess of the person they are fighting, or that they will surrender, as long as they are allowed to live. If someone's a powerful enemy and they think that if they surrender they'll be killed, they won't surrender. So they're kind of an interesting race. I like the idea that they have 5 arms / hands, and I don't know, they just look kind of funky to me.